Welcome to the Courage Over Cowardice podcast, where I cover topics and issues that will help you take a stand for Christ in culture. More than ever, followers of Jesus need courage to stand up, speak up, and to live out their faith, because people need to know that there's a God in heaven that loves them, and it is His truth that sets people free. Thanks for listening today, and I hope that you enjoyed the episode. Hey, I want to welcome everybody to the Courage Over Cowardice podcast. It is my pleasure to have a special guest with us today. Her name is Toni McFadden. She's an international speaker on the topic of abortion and healthy relationships. She's the founder of a program called Relationships Matter, which seeks to educate the youth on the degradation of sex in our culture while equipping them to walk out healthy relationships to not only protect themselves, but honor their spouse in the future. She's a graduate of Westchester University. She has a master's in professional counseling from Clark Summit University, and she is a wife, a mother of 4 beautiful children. She actively speaks and shares at churches and venues all over the country. We've had the privilege to have her at our church at Freedom Life, and hopefully we're going to work out to make her a part of our Courage Conference coming up in August as well. But I just want to say, Toni, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So for those who are not familiar with you, I gave a quick bio, and people either are watching and are listening. They're like, okay, like, who is she again? So just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we can talk a little bit about the book, and then we'll go into some aspects of the ministry.
Yeah, so Toni McFadden, and I am a pro-life speaker, and God has called me to be a voice for the voiceless, but not just that, but using my own story of someone who has had a past abortion, and just a picture of just the lies and the experience of that, and then God redeeming me from that and being able to share out of that perspective. And so I'm just very thankful that people invite me to their churches or to their rallies or to their conferences to be able to give the perspective with abortion, and specifically with chemical abortion, because that's what's being pushed right now. You can get that at CVS, Walgreens, over the counter, through online. And that's specifically the abortion I experienced. And so I'm able to speak on that subject and kind of walk people through the reality of that as someone who actually walked through it, and how difficult that is. So,
yeah. Wow. Mm-hmm. And so I have heard your story, and you have a book out. Tell us about the book.
Yeah. So my book is called Redeemed, My Journey After Abortion. And I wrote this for a few reasons. It was therapeutic for myself to write about my experience, but also I have seen when I have spoken at different churches or just different conferences, there are women who have had abortions in their past, and it could have been 30 years ago. And I've been vulnerable with them, and therefore they feel like this is the first time that they could ever share their story. And so I found that writing this book, this has helped other women be able to articulate what they felt when they've walked through their own abortion. So it's been healing for those who have walked through it. But I also believe it's been helpful for those who haven't experienced an abortion, how to have compassion for those like myself who have walked through it, because that's very difficult sometimes to know what to say to women, or you want to be kind of angry. And I get that because an injustice is being done to the innocent party. But I think that you can't just say, all women want to get an abortion. Some of them are being forced to, or there's sex trafficking, or, so it's a lot bigger than that. And so I think it's given people some language to use in order to help care for women who are walking through this.
Yeah, I think that's really good because, in one sense, we've over nuanced the abortion issue. Mm-hmm. It is an immorality. It is a killing of a human being. It is, a wickedness in our culture. And so and in the same token, there's people involved, and there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of stories, like you said, within that. And I think we can't shy away from that. We don't talk about it enough. I think churches have a tendency in our culture to, I think, let me say it like this. The accepted view is churches and Christians shame everybody, and so on. And honestly, my perspective is I think that's a bit rubbish, and used as a bullying to be silent with clarity on the issue. Though there are people that are extreme and are crazy and the fringe in general. I've been in the church my whole life. I have encountered that so little, and it doesn't mean it's not there. But speaking with clarity is so incredibly important, and I love how you embody both. You speak with clarity, but you do understand the true nuances of the people involved and the love and compassion that we need to bring. So your book covers what? Talk a little bit more about the topics and so on, so people can pick it up.
Yeah, some of the themes that are in the book are my being completely vulnerable with what I did, and learning how to accept what I did as well, not blaming it on other things, because that's particularly my story. It also talks about forgiveness, not only forgiving others, but forgiving myself, that the death and resurrection of Jesus does cover this sin, because I've heard so many women say, I don't know if God can forgive me for this. And then there's also, the redemption side of, I ended up marrying the guy that I had the abortion with 10 years later. And so the hand of God, and how just patient, not only patient he is, but in not only redeeming things, but how gracious he is to sinners, that I did not deserve that. I didn't deserve for him to die the death he died that I deserve. But not only did he do that, but then he goes and redeems a relationship. And, we have 4 children, and we're able to see, what our baby really would have looked like, because we have 2 girls and 2 boys. And so we see that aspect, but also the educational part of educating myself on the history of Planned Parenthood. Frederick Douglass said, knowledge unfits a man to be a slave. So when you begin to educate yourself and you start learning about the truth about abortion, and not just the procedures, but also the root causes of how this is in our nation, was very powerful for me to read, and to even learn about the racial parts of it, that, there's a target on the Black community when it comes to abortion, and learning that really is the number one killer in the Black community, and why we're not replacing ourselves right now is because of abortion. So there's a lot, spanning through that, through the book, but it's just really a tool to be able to educate people for forgiveness, and to give people a voice, and for the babies to have a voice too, that abortion should be, will never be the right option. It's just detrimental. And I tell people all the time, if I could go back, I would give my child life in a heartbeat, regardless of the circumstance I was in. Yeah, that's so good, and I love your ministry and your voice on this. And it's one of those things, we don't have to lessen the severity of what it is, and we certainly shouldn't lessen the grace of God and His redemptive power. And I love how you tell your story. And if you haven't heard that, I want to encourage everybody to pick up her book. It's available probably on Amazon and everywhere else that you can think of. My website too, which is ToniMcFadden.com.
ToniMcFadden.com. Excellent. So you also do, you talk about how you termed it on your website, and I love the term because it's very accurate, the degradation of what's happening in culture, sexually. So you do these talks, youth groups or churches, different venues. Talk about a little bit about what you hit, and then we'll get back to the abortion issue as well. But they do go together.
Yeah, so I'm actually headed next week out to Texas to do a talk for young college women on this topic. Healthy relationships, I think, is really important because I think when we have strong marriages in America, when we can go back to that again, that's going to be what changes society as well. But what I'm talking to them about is something that the culture will never talk to them about, and that is saving sex for marriage. And not just saving sex for marriage, but why it's a beautiful thing, why it's worth that. I think that, especially in the church, we don't talk about that enough either. We are, a lot of times you hear, well, sex is bad, don't do it, you'll get an STD or you'll get pregnant. But I'm like, those things are true, that could happen. But I think God, I first say, like, God is the creator of sex.
Yeah.
Not the culture. The culture just degrades it. But when you look at it in his perspective, one of the examples I love to use is that on your wedding day, you become one with your lives first. And this is God's design. You become one with your lives first. And then that night on your honeymoon, you become one with your bodies. But in that moment, it's not just how the culture treats it. It's not just about a feeling. It's not about that. In that moment, what you're doing with your bodies is actually an example of what you just did with your lives a few hours ago. And in that moment, you're only wearing your wedding rings, which is a symbol that you're protected by a lifelong commitment, where that is, powerful. First of all, that's really powerful that when you think about it that way, where the culture is degrading it so much because they're taking that beautiful thing outside of the context of marriage, and they're bonding with people, but without their lives, without a real commitment. Therefore, you see people breaking up all the time. Yeah. And then, bonding with someone else and breaking up and bonding, and then I'm telling people, like, listen, these decisions matter. Whether you start engaging in this in middle school or high school, whatever, that's building who you're becoming. And if someday you do want to get married, putting a ring on your finger is not automatically going to make you faithful and honest and trustworthy all of a sudden. You have to have built those things into who you are. So I think that's why it's really important to teach teenagers now that waiting for this is going to be worth it. And here's why. You got to have the why behind it, or you're not going to wait.
That's right.
And it can't just be all the negative stuff. It can't just be like, you're going to get pregnant, you're going to do, it's like, this is a beautiful thing, and things that are worth doing take work, and it's going to be countercultural. It's not going to be the norm. So that's just the gist of what I'm telling them. But I do other examples in setting boundaries and what that looks like, and, setting high standards and, things like that. And also representing the redemptive part, meaning just because you may have engaged in sex already doesn't mean that you can't have a good marriage. Doesn't mean that you can't, God can redeem those things, but you need to start rebuilding your foundation now, and don't wait.
That's so good. It's countercultural because the way the culture talks about sexuality is like we're all animals and we can't control ourselves, and it doesn't matter. But we all know that, instinctively it does matter. And I'll mention this just because it's on a podcast. It can be a little bit graphic, but, we're made for covenant. And so, the design is when a man and woman comes together for the first time and there's the breaking of the hymen, there's blood. The blood covenant is biblical. The blood covenant is in the idea and the mind of God. And even our sexuality, which God talks about covenant with Christ and the church and marriage, it's all kind of interwoven in that imagery, is so powerful to understand what a gift that it is. And I love what you said there. Marriage doesn't fix everything, like that purity and all those things that we need to walk in. That's one of the things that I talk with guys about, and young men and my sons. Like, if you have a lust issue, it's not resolved in marriage. It's just you have a lust issue and you're married, which makes it even more complicated. So I love that, becoming the person that God has called you to be, and the view of sexuality and the approach that you have with that. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about, you focus on these issues quite a bit. They're very near and dear to my heart. I'd say I focus on them quite a bit as well. But you're definitely more informed and on the front lines. Where are we culturally? Kind of give us just a snapshot or a picture. Roe versus Wade was overturned, which was amazing. It's one of the miracles that happened in our lifetime. So people in the church say, man, God just doesn't do miracles. God did an incredible miracle in our country, and most of the churches didn't even thank him for it. So that's a whole nother podcast I'll do maybe next time. But when you think of that, it obviously didn't resolve. Like all of a sudden, abortion didn't go away, and we know it's a state's issue. So maybe just kind of talk and give just an overview, and then we'll get into some of those details that you begin to bring up for just where we are as a nation with abortion, how prevalent it is, and just kind of diagnose the problem, if you would.
Well, when Roe versus Wade was overturned, that was a huge miracle that I don't think those before us thought would have happened, since 1973 and to now, which is amazing. But like you said, it got brought back down to the state level. And that's where the battle is now. And Pennsylvania, abortion is still legal. And so we still in Pennsylvania have to fight that fight with that, because we have also a governor who is very pro-choice as well. The previous one was pro-choice as well. So we have to be on the front lines of that. But I would say, I believe Pennsylvania is more pro-life than we think. You were there at the first National March for Life in Harrisburg. We've had it for the past couple of years now. And there's been thousands of people outside the Capitol in Harrisburg. Just like, it's been amazing when you see what's being represented based on.
We were there this year. It was amazing.
Yes. Yeah.
Or last year.
It was just amazing. Yeah. So, I guess it was last year now, 2024 now. But so even though Roe versus Wade was overturned, we still have this battle state by state. But we have seen the rate of abortion going down, and especially because of Texas, because they passed the heartbeat bill. But in other aspects, you have the true colors of people began to come out. If you didn't see when Roe versus Wade was overturned, people were coming out of woodworks that I did not even know where they stood on abortion. All of a sudden came out the woodworks on social media of how insane this became. And you could see the spiritual battle right in front of us. And just as you said, there were churches that were quiet as a mouse, did not say anything.
Or apologetic.
Exactly. We're apologetic towards it.
And I'll just say, any church that's apologetic towards that, if you go to that church, leave that church, because they've ceased. They don't know the Bible. Their leader is woke and weak, and you just need to leave. It's an embarrassment, and God will judge it accordingly. But that's just my thought. Continue on. Sorry.
Yeah, and that was just so eye-opening to watch the church, the real church, rise, and you started to see who were not for this at all. But we also are seeing how certain jobs will pay for women to go to another state to have an abortion. Then we're seeing now the push, as I mentioned earlier, now of the chemical abortion pills being pushed, because Planned Parenthood will do whatever they can to gain any kind of financial gain. If they cannot have her have an abortion in the second trimester, and I know people don't think women have abortions in the third trimester, but they do, they're going to push whatever they can. And so now they're pushing for the chemical abortion pill, where you don't even have to go in and see a doctor to get an ultrasound. Where she may not even be pregnant, and she's putting these poisonous pills in her body. They're having them on college campuses, and this is how they're pushing this now. So that's the side of the battle we're on now And you saw that change soon as Roe v. Wade was overturned, that Planned Parenthood got right on their strategy of, okay, we need a different angle. They're getting in our schools a lot more too.
Yes. They have
In the
partnership
public
with the
school,
schools.
they have partnerships with the schools and with colleges. There are some colleges that have a Planned Parenthood on their campus as their health center, which is just insane to me. Which actually, side note, I'm excited to speak at Clemson in February. They have a pro-life organization there, and the students are the ones who invited me. So I'm really excited to see that there are college campuses, D1 colleges that are representing the pro-life movement. So the battle is not done. Just because Roe v. Wade was overturned did not mean that we could just be like, oh, okay. And even though the rate of abortion has gone down, that's great. But I want to be where abortion is illegal and unthinkable, just as we would think of slavery. We would never want that or think that's okay now. Even though slavery exists in a different way now, sex slave and, slavery and things like that. But the battle is still raging, and until every child has the right to be born, our fight isn't done.
Well said. So let's go back to the abortion pill for a moment, because I think one of the grave concerns that I have is that statistically, it may seem like abortions are going down or the tide is turning, yet some of that may be due to the ease and accessibility of these at-home pills. And I want to believe that the tide is being turned, but that's why we have to. I'll just say this, and then you can talk a little bit about just what that, because a lot of people may not know as they listen to this, like the accessibility, what that chemical abortion at home is, what it does. I think the movie that Abby Johnson did called Unplanned showed that from a visual standpoint, that you could watch that with like your children and people get an idea. But I just want you to talk about that. But let me just say this to set it up. People sometimes have said, and I've said this in the past, and it was really stupid. I've said many stupid things in my life, and I try not to, and I try to grow. But I heard someone say this, and I repeated it. It wasn't often, but then I thought about it. I'm like, that is really an unwise, that'd be a nice way to say it, or just really a dumb thing to say. So people say, well, you can't legislate morality. We just need to focus on having services for people and changing the heart and mind. And I just want to say to those listening, we do both of those things. All legislation is morality. It's just a matter of whose morality. And we should fight for the unborn in this Jezebel moment where the Molech worship has continued and the voices of the prophets and the preachers and everybody else has been silenced and everybody's scared. We need to stand for the unborn, and we can love people well in the midst of that. But I just wanted to articulate that kind of going in. But if you could, you can say anything you want about that, but tell us a little more about the RU486. I just reposted something from John Amachukwu about those details that he had in his post on Instagram yesterday, where he gave some of the backstory of the eugenics and Nazis, all of that, which is interesting. But just give us a little bit from your perspective. So go ahead.
The chemical abortion pill, when I took it, it was 1999 and it wasn't even FDA approved. Not that we trust FDA anyway. That's just another whole topic, but they were already giving them out then. But basically what this pill, it's 2 sets of pills. And the first set, what it does is it blocks the hormone progesterone, which that chemical is very important because it attaches the baby to the uterus, and that's where the baby is getting blood flow, nutrients from the mother. And so what this pill does is it blocks it, and then the baby will detach from the uterus, and then the baby within 24 hours will pass away by starvation. And then the abortionist will give the girl a second set of pill. Now, again, she's getting this over the counter now. So, I mean, she's doing this herself. The second set of pill is to expel the pregnancy. Now, this is why this is so scary and so detrimental and shows that the abortion industry does not care about women, because then she's sitting on a toilet for hours, bleeding, sometimes having hemorrhaging, and many times often see their baby in the toilet. So traumatic, first of all. And I tell people all the time, because of my experience too, there's nothing normal or natural of taking the life of your own child.
Yeah.
It changes you.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of women, I think, that go to these marches, they're so angry because they're trying to justify what they've done, and they can't own up to it. And so it's easy to project all that anger onto other people.
Yeah.
And so I've heard many stories of women trying to get their baby out of the toilet because they told her it was just a clump of cells, that it wasn't a baby. And you can take these pills between 7 and 10 weeks. The baby already has a heartbeat. I mean, it's tiny, but it has a little form to it. You know, I'm sure you've seen pictures. It has a heartbeat. We know that at the moment of conception that baby has its own DNA, and that DNA is not going to be created ever again, ever, you know? And so all that reality, and then how traumatic it is to see that. And so you're giving these girls this in college campuses, and then they got to go in a public restroom, and they're not aware of how much they're actually going to bleed. And then they're in there for hours and hours and hours bleeding like this. There have been women who end up going to the hospital and they've bled, but there's still a baby in there. You know, I have a friend who's a doctor and has dealt with that many times. Scar tissue afterwards. Because of it. And so I think Abby Johnson did a very good job through her movie showing what that's like, because she did not exaggerate that one bit. And I know from my own experience, it started for me while I was in school. My pills actually didn't work. And that has happened for women too. Either I didn't take them correctly, whatever I was, 18 years old. I didn't really know what I was doing.
Yeah.
And a month later ended up hemorrhaging. Yeah. So, this is just so detrimental to them. And the abortion industry, talk about the numbers not being accurate. They don't have a national board. So when you look up the statistics, they're probably way higher than it is, because they don't have a national board. They're not really giving the statistics accurately, probably. And then, like you said, they're doing it in secret. So we don't know, did the girl get these offline? Where did she get the pills from? Or then the other side is the sex trafficking part. Like, men are just putting them in a girl's drink. Yeah. So you have her, so it's just horrible all around, and doesn't care for the woman or the baby.
And that's why, us fighting for morality within our culture, fighting for laws that would care for, women, care for babies, that would honor the Lord, is so incredibly important. I think throughout what you shared, you hit on, you have so many different conversations with people, and we see how horrific this is. It is Molech worship. It is anti-human. It is anti-God. It's demonic. And it's a pervasive evil that likes to kind of hide itself through propaganda, double speak, smiles and fake pictures, and women empowerment. But there's another component. I mean, I said a lot there, but this goes back to, Margaret Sanger was a eugenicist, racist, and the Planned Parenthood organization has always been such. So maybe just talk about that just for a few moments.
Yeah. So the famous line that Margaret Sanger said is, "We don't want word to get out that we want to eliminate the Negro population." And she said this because after slavery, and when a lot of Blacks were in America, they didn't know what to do with them. So they did forced sterilization, and that's where we could talk about the welfare system and all that. They had a goal, and their goal was, okay, well, maybe if we just leave them to themselves, they'll like die off and we won't help them. But they didn't realize, like, you know, during slavery, they were the ones doing all the work. Like, they knew how to survive, and their families were intact. Yeah. There was a mother and a father in the home. Yep. You know, and they had lots of kids, lots of them. So, and they were very faithful. You know, God was very important. And so they wanted to break that down as much as possible. So a lot of women who wanted, they tried to, you know, get the father out of the home. That was key. Two was to get them to stop having babies. And so to do that, they did the whole welfare system. And in order to get the welfare, they would sign off on things and they couldn't read, and they would sterilize them. I mean, as young as 8 years old. I mean, the last one that was done was like 1980 something, like not that far away. So, and then we have Margaret Sanger, who is trying to be strategic and just pushing like birth control as if it's not, like, it's to help, which the whole birth control thing is detrimental to. And I mean, it's harming women now. You know, the goal was never, it's all about population control. But her goal was also to deem anyone who she didn't see fit to be here. So it was mostly Blacks, but it was also those with disabilities, you know, anything like that. And so she actually filtered into the church too. Like, she would pay incentives to pastors to speak on birth control on the pulpit. I mean, Martin Luther King actually got the Margaret Sanger Award. We won't go into all of that because it was just...
I am well aware, but yes.
Okay. So it was that. And then she would speak at KKK rallies as well. So it wasn't like she was really hiding that she was a racist. But you see now her legacy is still being pushed because 88% of Planned Parenthood's facilities, abortion facilities, are in Black neighborhoods within walking distance.
Which is just astounding on its face. If you just take a look, you're like, this is so obvious and so racist and horrific. Yet crickets from leaders that can say something, could say something and awaken people. They're so full of fear. They're just full of fear and they love money. There's nothing. Hello. They really cared about the community, didn't they? Just
well, I'll tell you, I went to Maryland with Students for Life of America. Because I partner with them here and there. And we went to Maryland and we painted on the street right in front of a Planned Parenthood, Black Preborn Lives Matter. A couple of blocks down, it said Black Lives Matter on the street. Ours got washed off.
Of course it did. I'm surprised they didn't try to charge you with something because you're so bad. So
it was very telling.
You're right. It's, you know, we're in a, I'll say this, you know, not much has changed culturally from that time. Same spirit, different face. The propaganda may have been maybe communicated a little bit differently, but this goes to the highest level of, without getting into these details. I mean, this is the kind of things the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and others talk about and continue to do. I mean, complete with, you know, sterilization of large swaths of Black Africans on that continent. I mean, there's people like to say, well, you know, people just can't handle the conversation or they don't want to talk and all those things. And the reality is, I found the people that say that the most want to know real history the least.
Right.
Because it really does, it really is far worse than we realize. And it can be overwhelming. But within that, I think there's still a lot of hope because, you know, the earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof. We know that, Satan is the god of this age. We see him, but the Lord is at work, and his grace, and you're out there on the front lines on a consistent basis. What are some things that we can do? Let's go broad as far as a church, and then bring it down to individual responsibility. What are some things that you feel like, hey, we should be doing this, or things that you see that people are doing that can encourage and inspire us in this conversation? Because when you learn all these things and you hear the stories, it can almost feel like a lost cause, but it's not. There's so much hope, and every single baby matters. Every family matters. So kind of talk to us just for a few moments about that.
Well, I'll first speak to the individual is that we're in a time you cannot be silent on this anymore. You cannot be on the fence about it. There's so much education out there. You can look at live actions videos. You can look at Students for Life's videos. You can look at Embrace Grace. There's so many resources out there that can educate you if you are on the fence for some reason as a believer, where you stand on this. Looking at the procedures alone, just educate yourself on the procedures alone. And that should kind of wake you up to what's really going on. So I think for the individual, you got to educate yourself on your own and figure some of this stuff out too, and not just being fed whatever you see on TikTok and whatever. Look it up yourself, and what are the questions you have, and then don't be silent about it. Don't be afraid to speak up about it if you end up having a conversation with someone about it, because it's a spiritual thing first. This is not a political thing, because I think they use that in order to shut us up. It's a spiritual thing first, and I would say also Proverbs 31:8 commands us to speak up for those who cannot speak out for themselves. That means the vulnerable. That means babies. That is a command that the Lord has given us. And so in the individual case, I think once you know more, it should change your perspective. And I tell this to people all the time too. If you're a believer, God's word is your worldview. The culture doesn't get to dictate your worldview any longer. So, and as the church, I think that, I so admire churches like yours that are speaking on this, and that your congregation knows where you stand, and not only that, I would hope that if a girl ends up in a situation where she's in a crisis when it comes to her pregnancy, that she's running to your church, not away from it. And so that she knows she's going to be embraced. She's not going to be judged. I have a friend who, she was leading a Bible study. She was doing all these things, but then she did end up pregnant. And she went to her pastor expecting the worst. And when she told her pastor she was pregnant, the first thing her pastor said was, "Praise God for that baby."
Yeah.
That changed. Yes, you're going to have to endure what the consequence, but praise God for this baby. Right. And so I pray that the church brings a language where girls are fleeing to the church if they're in this situation and they're not feeling like they have to hide. I think that would be huge. And one of the practical things that I think the church can do, not to give women an excuse to be like, oh, well, if this happens, I'll just, we don't want to encourage that type of behavior. Yeah. But I think I've seen churches do baby showers for girls or collect diapers, because women, a lot of times, the main reason that a girl will end up having an abortion is because financial and no support. Yeah. Or she's going to get kicked out of her home or whatever the case is. And so being a support system, but also educating on the relationship side, having strong marriages in the church, and that being the cultural norm. I think it has to be holistic for the church. Yeah. It can't just be a one-sided thing. We have to be holistic about from relationships to marriage, kids, this is how it's supposed to go. But for some reason, if you step out of that, this is why the church exists, to walk with you through it. So you're not running to evil Planned Parenthood, who's not going to care for you afterwards anyway. So if that answered some of them.
No, that's so good. It's so important. Grace and truth need to go hand in hand. They need to go together. And sometimes when people speak the truth, they say, well, there's no grace there. That can be the case, but oftentimes it's not. It's just someone has a misguided understanding of what grace is. And you don't fully realize the importance of grace or what it is, absence of truth. They go hand in hand.
Amen.
And so churches do no favors when they're silent or they acquiesce or they apologize for the truth of God's word, because it does cut. God's word's a sword. It does cut. It gets right to the heart of the issue. But within that, as we bring the truth and we also bring the grace, the antidote, that's what people can run back to. And I think it would do us well to stop fighting against stereotypes that may or may not exist. For the most part, they don't. Stereotypes, there's aspects, there's, truth that, there's a reality of why things can become a stereotype. But, and I'd also just echo what you said, like sometimes people say, maybe you're listening to this podcast, like, great, the church should do more and I'll be involved. And I say, I agree with that completely. But also, everyone has a platform. In fact, everybody has a platform nowadays, even beyond any other time period in the history of humanity. And, the most listened to and famous people in the world, or the most listened to, like whether it's on TikTok, podcasts, and all those things, they're not the people that you would think. They're not the voices maybe that you would want. But the reality is that this shows like how important our voice is. So as I like to tell people all the time, like you need to be actively, as you get older, you're still teaching your kids, you're still investing into your grandkids. You're not being silent, especially in the Cultural Revolution, where the pressure is to just do away with all of the olds. That was the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Do away, anything that was seemingly old, and we need to bring new. The old paths of God's word are true, and the value of life is unchanging. And so I want to give you the last word for this, and any other thoughts. And I'll just set this up before I hand it over to you. The Bible is pro-life. And God is pro-life. There's just no way around that. God gave us life. Jesus sacrificed his life so we could be raised to new life. He wants us to receive eternal life. And he calls Christians to fight for life on every level. And Toni, you're doing that. So the last word goes to you.
Well, I would just say that with God with us, greater is he who is in us and he who is in the world. And we do not need to be afraid to speak up, and we're going to be held accountable too for what we've done. And I think that we shouldn't let fear stop us. That I often will get DMs that are not the nicest to me, but I always think, these babies are going through so much worse, that I can take a couple of hits like that through my, some keyboard warriors than what these babies are going through. And so just as, Pastor Sam said, each and every one of us has a platform, and we need every single voice until abortion is made illegal and unthinkable. And we get to be a part of that. And that's the side I would want to be on.
Awesome. Toni, thanks for what you're doing. I appreciate your ministry. Appreciate your voice. Thanks for being on the podcast, and blessings to you.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. I hope this message has inspired you to courageously stand up, speak up, and to live out your faith. If you like what you heard today, give me a 5-star review, follow the Courage Over Cowardice podcast, and share it with others to learn how to stand for truth in the midst of culture.